صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. أعيدوها ثانية رحمكم الله. الثالثة بأعلى أصواتكم. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. صلى الله عليك يا رسول الله. صلى الله عليك يا أبا عبد الله. يا رحمة الله الواسعة ويا باب نجاة الأمة. يا ليتنا كنا معكم سادتي فنفوز والله فوزا عظيما. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين سلاما دائما أبدا مؤبدا ورحمة الله وبركاته. قال الله تعالى في كتابه الكريم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إن في خلق السماوات والأرض واختلاف الليل والنهار والفلك التي تجري في البحر بما ينفع الناس وما أنزل الله من السماء من ماء فأحيا به الأرض بعد موتها وبث فيها من كل دابة وتصريف الرياح والسحاب المسخر بين السماء والأرض لآيات لقوم يعقلون. The most merciful, I seek refuge from him. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in his glorious book, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, verily, in the creation of the heavens and the earth, and in the alternation of night and day, and the ships which sail through the sea with that which is of use to mankind, and the water, the rain, which Allah sends down from the sky, and makes the earth alive thereafter when it's dead, and the moving of the living creatures of all kinds that He has scattered therein throughout the world, and in the veering of the winds and the clouds which are held between the sky and the earth, are indeed signs, proofs, and evidences for people of understanding. Sadaqallahu al-Aliyyul Azim. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this verse is talking to us, like we talked about yesterday, as He's addressing us as humans who He created with intellects, and we can comprehend various things around us. And He gave us a very comprehensive list in saying, if you were to reflect on all these signs that are in front of you in this world that you take part in every single day, you will surely reach a conclusion that none of this is random, and that everything is ordered, and that it comes from the mighty, the wise, the one who is the all-knowledgeable, the all-powerful, and the all-merciful. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala implores you to use what? Your intellect. He goes on and He says, these are all signs for people of understanding. And so we are building off of this concept of the intellect, of rationale, to try to tie ourselves to our religion, to tie ourselves to the Ahlul Bayt, and specifically Sayeda Fatimah, sallallahu alayhi wa alihi. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Now, I want a show of hands from the brothers and the sisters so I can see, and I'm going to ask a specific set of questions that are very important. And we're now going to assume a very worst case scenario. If you were in school or in university or at work, and a professor comes to you, a professor, for example, of philosophy, or a professor of biology or evolution, and comes and tells you, he tells you to prove to him that God exists. Does anyone here feel comfortable that they can do that? With a show of hands. Okay. Does anyone feel comfortable that if they're sitting in front of a professor who's supposedly obviously well-learned and knowledgeable and knows the different systems of thinking, and he comes to me or she comes to me and they say, prove to me that prophethood is a real thing? With a show of hands, is anyone confident that they can prove that concept? Okay. How about the proving that the Quran is actually the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Is anyone comfortable with proving that? Okay. See, that is a problem. Because these are things that are fundamental to our religion. So you guys already know the first step. The first step is employing our intellects to do that. But it is scary when someone who's supposed to be well-versed in dealing with arguments and proving and disproving things comes and tells me to prove these things. But here's the thing. It's not that difficult. And we gave the example of the big scary bear because if you can prove to an atheist professor that God exists and that he's the only, like there is no one other than God that is necessarily existent, and all of us are dependent existence, and that God sends prophets and God sends messages to his people, if you can prove it to a professor like that, therefore you can prove it to anyone else, and you should have absolute confidence in your religion. And that's what we're going to try to do today. We're going to give you each the arguments and the tools, the ability to where if anyone comes to you anywhere around the world, you're going to be able to confidently prove your belief. Even though right now we just gave the verse in the Quran. It's when we look around us at the sky, when we look at creation, when we look at the order of the universe, we automatically think this couldn't have been random. And you're already halfway to proving any person that tries to come and say that God isn't real or that God did not order the universe. Where do we start? So we start with the universe. We start with the material world around us. We see that the universe is ordered, that when we took in science class and everything, we saw that they tell us that the universe has an origin and that the universe is constantly expanding. These are things that science proves. Tangible evidence proves that the universe was started at one point and everything in it, right? Everything within space-time, and it continued to expand. And we are all creatures, and the animals and all the planets and the stars and the galaxies, and we all did not exist at one point, and we existed. And so if that atheist professor were to come to me and tell me, prove to me that God exists, I would, using my common sense and using that tangible evidence, go right back to the point of origin, the start of the universe. Even the atheists will admit, they'll be like, we believe in tangible experiments because what? It's something I can sense. I hold this cup, I can feel the warmth of the cup or the coolness of the cup, right? I touch, I feel, I smell, I hear. I can verify that things exist and are true through my senses. But then when it comes to that starting point of the universe, before the universe was created, we say there's a God that is not material, that is not confined by space and time, that is confined by the material world. Because everything within the material world, our senses, our ability to perceive, is all a byproduct of this universe that we're in. So we're coming with an assumption and saying God is the one that created that material world. And because he created that material world, God can't have any similar characteristics to that material world that he created. Because if you were to have any characteristics similar, for example, if we say God, wal-iyadhu billah, he has a body, or God has a shape, or God has a voice, or God has anything that we see within the material world, that these characteristics, if we say God has any of those things, then that conception of what God is, that figure or that thing that we imagine can't be God. Because what does it mean? Aslan, our ability to perceive things and perceive information when it comes to the material world, bodies, shapes, forms, sizes, smells, these are all things that we see within the material world. And we're saying that God is not material. So he doesn't have any of those things. And so we go back to that atheist professor. Okay, the universe. They say the Big Bang happened and the universe expanded. There are scenarios. Either the universe, this material but non-conscious entity, right? Whatever they say, the protons or that energy that collided and caused that to expand, either it created itself or it came from randomness, or something, some being put it into order. Once again, we talked about a bit of cause and effect, the law of cause and effect yesterday. Can something right now, anything that I see around me that's material, the chair that I'm sitting on, the person, myself, can I create myself? Obviously not. No one's going to accept that. No one that's normal. Because to create yourself means that you had to at least leave the ability to create yourself, like you have the power to do that, to know yourself before you existed. And that's impossible. Because we all know at one point, we were born into this world, and before that, we didn't exist. And so the first argument, if that atheist professor comes and says, it created itself, or it created itself, we don't accept that. Doesn't make sense. And no normal being, no normal person accepts that. The second thing, it came from randomness. So we have to ask a question. What is randomness? Is anything truly random? If we know the entire universe started at one point, and these, the laws of gravity were formed, electromagnetic forces, the cause and effect that we see all around us. If we see clouds moving in the sky, that means there's wind pushing it. If we feel heat when we go outside and light, it's from the sun. If the sun sets, we feel the cool and the lack of that. Is anything really random? No, randomness is not a thing. It might be perceived as random. So, for example, I'm minding my own business, and out of nowhere, I'm sitting in my backyard, and a ball flies over the fence, a wooden fence, for example, and the ball lands. That occurrence is random to me. I didn't expect it. I didn't know it was going to happen. But obviously, someone or something had to have kicked that ball over the fence to where the ball landed in my backyard. And so, to say that the universe randomly existed is an illogical concept, because it has to have a cause. Anything, especially what's immaterial, the chair that's created in front of you, the phone that's in your hands, the car that you're driving, it was all thought about, conceptualized, put into drawing or put into planning, and then it was created. And the universe being a material entity is the exact same thing. So to say it randomly appeared is something that is illogical, and most people in the world will not accept, and people will choose to probably accept these things if they just don't want to accept God, usually for emotional reactions and problems that they face in their lives. That's usually what we see. And now the third one. Okay, we know that every effect has a cause. We know that in the material world around us. And the same thing with the universe. The universe, right, is the effect of something that put it together. That cause, or that cause, that creation, that power that created it, that comes from something. And that something can't be material like the material world, because we're saying the material world did not exist at one point, and then it existed. And so we say that cause, that being, that power that caused it to exist, the universe to exist, that's God. And we call that, like in logic, we say that's a necessary existence. Because we look all around us, is anything that exists in the material world a necessary existence? All of us did not exist, like we said, at one point, and then we existed. But this being that created the universe, is he an unnecessary existence? Of course not. Because then that would mean that at one point he didn't exist. But then he existed, and then we're going to say, well, who created him? And then if we say he did that one that created God didn't exist and someone created him, we just get this infinite chain that doesn't end, and we know that's impossible. What does it mean that something just goes on infinitely? Infinity, when it comes to reality, is not a real thing. Numbers are constructs that we can use to categorize the world around us, and we can suppose and assume that numbers can go to infinity, because it's not something tied to a real thing, even though it categorizes things, and we need it to prove things. But a number is not like saying something exists out there. A number does not exist in the physical world. Right? There's a human, I say that's one human. And so, that God, that being, that necessary existence, that is who is God. So then we go back to the original thing. We said that the universe is ordered. We see the order around us. So if the universe is ordered, that means it had to have been planned with knowledge. And so we start the first thing. This being that is God has to have the knowledge to create it. Other than that, it's not random. It can't have existed by itself. That being that's knowledgeable put that universe into motion, right? And then we go on, we ask again, well, if he's able to create this universe, he has to have the power to do so. And when we look at the power of the material world, like my power, or the power of a massive machine, or of a tiger, or a wild animal that's stronger than us, they have power, but it's still limited. But true power is one where you have an ability to do things that no one else has the ability like you. And that's, we say, God is the all-powerful, the all-knowledgeable, the all-powerful, the all-able. He can choose to create and not to create. And we go about and we say, God's, then we say, okay, how do we classify Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, God? We can't then come and assume that we understand the reality of what it means to be all-knowledgeable. We can say that God is all-knowledgeable. We can understand what that is generally. But to say that we can for sure point out what it means to be all-knowledgeable is impossible. Because our minds, us as human beings, we can only deal with a limited amount of information. So we can't conceptualize that. Or the same thing when we say God is all-powerful. Yes, He has the power to impose on us. But God's essence, this is what the Ahlul Bayt, this is what the Quran, this is what the Prophet pushed. God's essence is His attributes. And so that is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He is the all-powerful. He is the all-knowledgeable. He is the all-able. That is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So therefore, if someone comes to me and says, prove to me that God exists, it can be a professor who spent 50 years teaching at a university, and he's an expert in philosophy or atheism, and he has to go through that route and try to prove or disprove this thing. And that's that method that we employed, he can't deny it unless he denies these fundamental things in reality that all of us deem to be true, and then we don't take him seriously or take her seriously. So that proving of God is not that difficult concept. You don't have to be someone that studied logic and philosophy and religion your entire life to prove that. That's one. And now we go through that intellect, that rational argumentation that we use to prove God exists. We say that, and God put order in the world, and we see that He created us, and we see that us as humans, we look towards systems of law to follow. Without law, our societies would go into chaos. We said yesterday that these are societies that we live in that have separated the religion from the state, and yet they still govern and set their own laws. Because to not have laws means chaos. And so we say that God, we prove that He's all knowledgeable, all powerful, all wise, almighty, all merciful. Is He? And we know He created us because we came from somewhere and that He had to have created us. And we see that we are able to rationalize and think in ways that other creatures around us can't. You know, animals, they say in logic, when logic is a very important science that everyone can and should study because it just helps you categorize things around you and the way that the mind operates and thinks. When we reflect, for example, animals can feel emotions. We see that. We see that with pets. We see that with wild animals. They can feel emotions. But an animal can't come and think about the concept of love and think about the concept of mercy or power. An animal just is. If animals were rational beings like us, they would have constructed societies like us. No other creation we see is like us. Even very intelligent animals, for example, like monkeys or dolphins or dogs, ajallakumullah, they have some type of ability like where their brain, their functioning power is better than other animals, but they can't come and construct society like we can. And so we see this faculty that we have that helps us construct and build and plan and rationalize. And we say, is God going to create us? And we see that human societies naturally will lean towards governing themselves. And He's not going to give us a system for us to follow. What's the point? Because also one of the main things is that someone that is all knowledgeable, all wise, all powerful is not going to do things abathan. Abathan means He's not going to do things just for the sake of doing them or without plan. Everything is planned to do for God. And God, when we say God can't do something that is, for example, oppressive, or God can't do something that is not right, because to do usually oppression, usually doing something wrong, it stems many a time from ignorance, either or lack of care or lack of truly understanding the harm that you're doing or causing. So to assume that God is going to do something wrong or God's going to do something oppressive means that at one point God became ignorant or he became unaware or unreflecting of the action that he's doing. Wal-'iyadhu billah. That's not who God is. That's not who the necessary existent is. That's what we fall under because we're limited humans, but that's not God. And so God is going to give us a system to follow. And we have to now look, what is that system? So it's our rationale that led us to proving God, to saying that God, defining his attributes, to going on to saying that God would have to give us a system of law. What do we see? We've seen historically throughout times, men, beings have come, people like us have come and said, I am a prophet of God. I represent God. God has commanded me. God has revealed to me to tell you to worship one God and to follow his laws and to accept me as a prophet. How can I then come to accept this man or this person that's coming with supposed revelation as a representative of God? Because this being that's all powerful, all knowledgeable, all wise, what does it mean to him to just reveal information to a human? It's nothing. The concept of God communicating with creation is not something we should be baffled by. I mean, God communicates with us every day. When we said the signs in the verse are meant for you to reflect, that's a type of communication, although it might be indirect. And some can argue it's direct because it's everywhere around you. Everything around you points to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There's another verse in the Quran, سَنُرِيهِمْ. Oh, I'll just say it in English just to summarize time. We will show them our signs, basically all around, everywhere, until it becomes clear to them that this is the truth. So Allah is always communicating with you. It just so happens to be that with a prophet, he gives him specific revelation for that system of law that we need to live our lives. And so we'd say, well, God would have to give that person that comes with revelation the ability to prove that he's actually a prophet. When I come and say, for example, I saw this event happen, people, or I saw someone do this or say this, someone will be like, you have to prove it. When it comes to, for example, something that's not really insignificant, I might be taken at face value and said, okay, you know, sure enough, you saw someone fall while walking, or you saw someone slip or whatever. But when you're saying, I represent God, I am calling for you to follow a message, you have to abide by laws, you have to set restrictions upon yourself. There is an afterlife, hell, heaven, judgment. That person has to be able to prove that claim. And so God gives that person that's giving that calling for the message revelation, the miracle, the ability to perform miracles. And what is a miracle? A miracle is something that is not normally able to be done by humans, right? And it's not something that we see in the world around us, but that when we see it, we know that this is something that is not normal. It cannot be done by the human by himself. And obviously, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, like we said, has the ability to give a person the ability to do things. Now, we look at now the supposed revelations of prophets. We hear about Moses, Nabi Musa, Jesus, Nabi Isa, Adam, Nuh, the Bible, the Torah. They give us stories of the prophets, right? These are the main Abrahamic traditions that have proven God. So right now we're sitting within the circle of monotheism, of having one God. We see the concept of prophethood, and these men came and called for things. So we look, for example, we see in the Quran that Nabi Musa went to Pharaoh and he had a set of miracles. One of them is that he had his staff. He threw it, it became a giant serpent. Or that he hit his stick or his staff on the sea and it split. Or that Nabi Isa, the Quran tells us, and the Bible tells us, that he was able to revive the dead. He was able to heal the blind. These are things that no normal human being can do. But we say, what is it and why is it that prophets came with different miracles? And we'll get to a reason of proving that what is an existing miracle today, which is the Quran. But we're just going through the logic and the rationale. And we're just assuming that we're looking at history through a historical lens. If we say, we hear from the different scriptures and history, for example, that at the time of Jesus was the time, Nabi Isa alayhi salam, was the time at the heights of the Roman Empire, and before it the Greek Empire, and medicine was very pronounced and popular at the time. Doctors were given great status. And so Nabi Isa comes, and the scripture says he was able to revive the dead. He was able to cure people with leprosy. He was able to heal the blind or remove blindness from the blind. Those are like miracles or things tied to the human that no doctor can cure. Nabi Musa, if we look at the Quran, who did he deal with first when he wanted to prove his claim? After, obviously, he went to Fir'aun. The pharaohs, the sorcerers, went and they challenged him. And when he came, so they had their sihr, they had the false, how they played and messed with people's minds, and the sorcery and just fooling people's eyes. The Prophet Musa comes, and with the staff, he throws it on the ground, it turns to a giant serpent. The Quran says the first people to believe were the sorcerers. And so, the logic of miracles is that the miracle will come and challenge the popular thing that is dominant at the times of those societies. And now we will focus on the final messenger. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. We see that his miracle is the Quran. In the Quran, there are various challenges where the Prophet, or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and through obviously the Prophet communicating with the people of Mecca and the Arabs in the Arabian Peninsula, and anyone in general, bring forth 10 chapters like this. Bring forth a chapter like this. Bring forth a verse like this. But to understand the value of these statements, we have to understand who did the Quran, who was the Quran revealed to? But before that, I have to ask a question. Who from us here trusts what is transmitted to us historically? Any type of historical report? With a show of hands. Like, for example, if there's an event that was so popular that everyone talks about it, for example, like World War I, or any major event that happened in world history. With a show of hands, who trusts history? Generally. So-and-so, not so much. Some people trust history, some people don't. We have to address that first before we address the rest of our arguments, because history, the Quran, is a historical event. The Prophet existing is a historical event. So we have to say something important. There are different types of historical reports. Sometimes something is transmitted by so many people where the odds of that thing happening or that thing not actually happening are not taken seriously because so many people relate it. For example, at night here in Seattle, I decided to go to sleep early at 8 p.m. The next morning, everyone, without even, let's say videos didn't exist and cameras didn't exist, everyone in the city is talking about how there is a massive falling of shooting stars in the sky. Everyone's talking about it, but I didn't see it. Would I be inclined to believe the majority of the city talking about they saw this, or would I assume that they're lying? And especially that when we know that not everyone lies for the sake of lying. You might have serial liars, but not everyone's like that. There are trustworthy people, there's people that aren't trustworthy, and there's people that will just actually say what they saw. So yeah, when it comes to an event like that, we're going to say, sure, everyone talked about it, everyone said it happened, even though I didn't see it with my own eyes, but everyone's talking about it. Therefore, that is a source of knowledge for me to confirm something happened. Now, me being informed by 1,000 people or 1,000,000 people that something happened, even though I can prove that it's true, and that's in support, you can prove that something happened through that, it's not the same as seeing it. But that's okay, because truths or certainty in a human being has levels. But you can definitely reach certainty from a historical report. We know that Thomas Jefferson existed, even though none of us met Thomas Jefferson. We know that any popular figure from Napoleon Bonaparte existed, even though we never saw him. History relates to us these figures. They played central, very big roles in the formation of countries and societies. The same thing with Nabi Muhammad. The same thing with Isa alayhi salam. The same thing with Musa alayhi salam. These figures existed. We know through just the sheer number of people talking about these figures that there is no way that they didn't exist. And the same thing with the Quran. So when we look at history, and we go back to our point, history relates to us that the Arabs were a people of immense eloquence. The Arabs were not a people of an oral tradition. They did not write. And we see that there are societies today where the knowledge of these cultures and communities is passed through from people by the tongue, by words, and it's not written and recorded. So the Arabs were of those people. They were in the Arabian Peninsula. Around them were the Byzantines and the Persian empires, who were people of writing. But the Arabs weren't like that. And it is known that the Arabs were a people of eloquence. And how did they display this eloquence? Through poetry. In battles, in times of love, and sadness, and anger, and grief, they relayed poetry. And these poems have reached us today. And we know when we read these poems. So the Prophet Muhammad, a man from the Arabian Peninsula, goes to a people that are immense with their eloquence. And no one is like them. And he challenges them. We said Musa has to prove his prophethood. He challenges the status quo. The status quo was sorcery. Nabi Isa had to challenge the status quo, and he challenged it, and he came and he's able to do things that doctors weren't do. Nabi Muhammad, sallallahu ala Muhammad, challenged the status quo of the eloquence of the Arabs and said, look, I have this revelation from God. You will not be able to come with anything like it. And those Arabs, as history relates to us, and we can prove, could not challenge the Quran. For if they were able to challenge it, the Prophet spent 10 years in Mecca with barely any supporters. And Quraysh were the strongest Arab tribe in the Arabian Peninsula. And they had good connections with the Byzantines, with the Roman Empire, the Eastern Roman Empire. And they had support, and they had wealth, power. They could mobilize armies. The other tribes that existed around Mecca would come and heed their commands. For 10 years, the Prophet had barely any supporters, and he was calling with the Quran, and the Arabs still had their poetry. And they were able to disprove it, or they were able to nullify it. If they were able to, at the height of their power, they would have done it. And khalas, the message of Islam would have dissipated. But we see the Prophet for 10 years, they could not challenge him. And we see the number of Muslims increased. And we see historical reports when we read history, and that's why it's important to connect to history, that say that there were people, when they heard it, they were like, there is nothing like this. Today, the ones, us, that know how to read Arabic and know how to, and read Arabic poetry, when we read the Quran and we read Arabic poetry, we see this is not like poetry. It's unique. And then people come and they try to prove, for example, scientific miracles in the Quran, or the fact that the Quran predicted that events were going to happen far before they happened, and they did, or other aids for the thing. But that is proving the miracle of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It's the eloquence of the Quran, the unmatched eloquence. And so those verses come where he challenged the mushrikeen of Mecca. He said, bring forth a verse like this, bring forth a chapter like this, bring forth 10 chapters like this, and they couldn't do so. And if I want to get surefire confidence in that, I mean, that's a rational proof right there. We just go about proving things. And rational proof is just as valid in proving something as, for example, me seeing something and saying it exists. And because we use that rational proof to prove God, to prove prophethood, and to prove the validity of the Quran. And so you have to give weight to the rational proof. You have to give weight to your intellects in helping you guide your life. And then what's required from you? Go read the Quran. Learn Arabic if you have to. What's wrong with that? Today in our societies, we don't have enough people that know Arabic, especially from people our age, the young people. And this is the language of scripture. It's the language of the hadith of the Ahlul Bayt. And we don't know Arabic. So what do we need? We need some people to learn Arabic. Go, learn it. Become able to read and write and speak and teach others. We need that to tie people to the Quran, to tie people to the hadith. And so that is the rational argument to prove these necessary things tied to the religion. And so when we look at history, we tie this to Sayeda Fatimah. We're commemorating her martyrdom. We see that there's a divide amongst the Muslims historically on the interpretation of events, or what events actually transpired or not. So as a Shi'i Muslim, if I'm going about using the rational argumentation, and then I get to the point where Islam is the religion, and I accept that Nabi Muhammad is the prophet, and I accept the Quran as the book of God, and then I know that there is hadith from the prophet. So that leads us to the other point about history. There are things that are mass transmitted or very popularly transmitted by people, or popularly accepted, to where we don't doubt that this person or this figure said a certain thing. But then there are relayings of events where, for example, we see that someone narrated something, whether it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago, but there's only a couple of people narrating it. And so it's not like something that's mass transmitted or popularly accepted. So we look, for example, at the hadith. We see one of the most wide, far-spread hadith where all the Muslims accepted was the hadith of Ghadir, where the Prophet stopped the people in Ghadir Khum, and it's narrated in Sunni sources, in Shi'i sources. And he says, he raises Imam Ali's hand, he says, whoever I have his master, Ali is his master. And he says, I leave behind me, or after me, two weighty, heavy things. If you are to follow them, you will not go astray. The book of Allah and my family, the Ahlul Bayt. And they will never separate until the day of judgment. To never separate means literally that they will never separate. So it doesn't mean that the Ahlul Bayt will all die at one point and it's just the Quran. No, لَن يَفْتَرِقَا. They will never separate حَتَّى يَرِدَ عَلَيَّ الْحَوْض, until they reach me at the pool that the believers will drink with before they enter paradise. So Hadith al-Ghadir proves the Imamah of Amir al-Mu'mineen. And to prove the Imamah of Amir al-Mu'mineen, utilizing this hadith, we look at the Islamic history of the virtues of Amir al-Mu'mineen, of how there was no one like him, about how both traditions accept that no one was more knowledgeable than him, that no one lived with the Prophet more than him. In fact, Imam Ali only left the Prophet's side twice in his life. Once, because when Imam Ali was born, Nabi Muhammad was living with Abu Talib, Imam Ali's father. And Imam Ali narrates in Nahj al-Balagh, he says, he would literally feed me as a toddler. I would walk around him just like the baby camel would follow its mother. And he grew up teaching him the ways of prophethood, the knowledge of prophethood. The only time where Imam Ali and the Prophet left one another and departed from one another was when the Prophet escaped from the mushrikeen in Quraysh, when Imam Ali slept in his bed. And the second time was when the Prophet went to one of the wars of Hunayn, and he left Amir al-Mu'mineen behind in Mecca because there was a fear of the hypocrites trying to take over Medina when the Prophet was gone. And Imam Ali was sobbing, crying that he had to leave the Prophet. And this hadith is also accepted by all Muslims. He says to him, he says, I'm leaving you behind, but is it enough to console you that you are to me like Harun, Nabi Harun, the prophet of brother Musa, the prophet of Nabi Musa? You are to me like Harun is to Musa, except that there is no prophet after me. And then we look at the Quran and see the relationship between Harun and Musa, and how Musa, what he wanted from Harun. He said, leave behind me a successor, one that could continue my affairs. And we see that Nabi Musa and Nabi Harun faced Pharaoh together. When Nabi Musa went to go receive revelation from God, who did he leave in charge? Harun alayhi salam. So when he says, you are like to me, that just like Harun is to Musa, it means that you carry all the same duties and positions that Harun did, except you are not a prophet. An imam's job is to uphold the message. And so we look, history is filled with examples that Amir al-Mu'mineen, no one was more suitable than Amir al-Mu'mineen to lead the Muslims. And we have divine appointation. And so now we have to ask, what is the cause that would cause people today to say that, no, it's not that clear that Amir al-Mu'mineen is the Imam, or that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala divinely appoints people? One answer is that through rational proofs and rational argumentation and looking at history clearly, we can prove clearly that Imam Ali was meant to be appointed. And just looking at history, looking at hadith around us. Another one is that just because, for example, the majority of Muslims who are Sunni aren't Shi'i, doesn't mean that, oh, they might be right. Or there's a sliver of doubt that, oh, me with all my belief, I could be wrong. If everyone's saying that, oh no, it's the companions or the Muslims choosing who they want to set to rule. But you have to understand, what is the reality of the Sunni tradition? The Sunni tradition, when we look historically, has been a religion orchestrated and fed information by governments. Because when we look at history, when the Prophet passed away, it was either with the people that were with Amir al-Mu'mineen or the people that went against him. And the Muslims, generally around the Muslim lands, the ones that were converted to Islam in Yemen, throughout the Arabian Peninsula, when they looked, who were the Muslims that had the oldest history with Islam? The people, the Muhajirin, the people from Quraysh, and the Ansar, the people from Medina. And so these new converts are like, we have nothing to do with the choosing of a successor or anything like that. They left it to the people that were there. They're like, they were around the Prophet the most. They would know what the Prophet would want. And so we have to focus on the big players within the Muslim tradition and how they reacted. And so Amir al-Mu'mineen, we say he was divinely appointed, and we're able, like we said, to utilize all these narrations in history to prove our point. But you assume that the Sunni tradition is talking about all these things that we talk about historically. They talk about the martyrdom of Sayeda Fatimah. They talk about Saqifa. They talk about Ghadir. They don't talk about it, barely. Barely. We've all probably been around Sunni friends. They have never heard of these things in their lives. Because why would you, even though they come with interpretations for these events, But why would I? Obviously they're gonna rationally think, they're like, why would I bring harm or potential confusion to my life? They have theological principles for them where they have really big scholars early on who said we should not even narrate the differences and the wars and the problems that happen between the companions. Because for them, all companions are just, all companions are fair, especially the big name players, the companions who are supposed to be the oldest alongside the Prophet. So obviously he's not. We have specific things when we go look at their works. For example, what Ahmad ibn Hanbal would say, what al-Dhahabi would say, what other big scholars would say, we should not relay these information to the public. Because they have a theological principle that says we should not bring confusion to the people. So obviously they're not going to go through these things. So because even though you've proven that Imam Ali was meant to be the Imam, and that Imamah is a concept, and that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala divinely appoints Imams, doesn't mean that the rest of the world has to be on that, because they just weren't exposed. We said the Sunni tradition is a religion formulated by the governments. When Imam Ali was the caliph, and who fought against him? Muawiyah. The Umayyad propaganda against the Ahlul Bayt, when we look at history, cursing Amir al-Mu'mineen on the pulpits, hatred towards the Ahlul Bayt in these communities that didn't know about Amir al-Mu'mineen. The hadiths within the Sunni tradition, when we look, a ton of the hadiths are related through those who were enemies of Amir al-Mu'mineen. Then the Abbasid tradition comes, and they started the tradition with, oh, we want to do an uprising for the Ahlul Bayt and stuff. And then they took over, and they didn't give it to the Imams, but then they also started leaning towards that we have to accept the Sunni narrative and tradition, and they enforced history and hadith to benefit them. So history, there's going to be different looks at history, but because we know that we can read truth, one of these approaches towards history has to be correct, because we know truth exists in this world. And so now we come to the issue of Sayeda Fatimah. Within the Shi'i tradition, I have to give precedence to my tradition. I don't care about what the Sunni tradition says. I've proven that Imam Ali is the Imam and the other Imams are after him. But I look at my tradition, the narrations of the Ahlul Bayt, and what the Shia have been relaying since the beginning of Islam, that Sayeda Fatimah died a martyr. Sayeda Fatimah was struck and hit. Sayeda Fatimah was denied her rights. Imam Ali was denied what was given to him by God. My tradition is very clear. But then I might have the doubts. Can I find things that prove what I'm trying to get at from the Sunni tradition? Of course I can. 100% I can. There are narrations clearly within the Sunni tradition in books that they deem very respected and accepted for whatever the content is within, that Sayeda Fatimah died angry at the first two caliphs, that Sayeda Fatimah was denied her rights, that Sayeda Fatimah was buried at night and no one knew where she was buried, and that the first caliph was not allowed to pray over her. There are narrations that say that her house was threatened to be burned down because Imam Ali and Banu Hashim and those loyal to Imam Ali were in the house of Imam Ali and they did not want to give bay'ah, and so masses mobilized and they were threatened with burning. There are narrations within their tradition and reputable sources in their tradition that say that their house was attacked. There are narrations that say that the first caliph, before he died, regretted attacking the house of Fatima. And when we look at their scholars that came from the Sunni tradition, there's a plethora. I have them written in Arabic, but there's no time to read them all out in Arabic. Where they wouldn't, he clearly said, he's like, I wish I didn't do three things. One of the three things he didn't wish he did was that he attacked the house of Fatima. One of these, their big scholars will come and say that, oh, the house of Fatima was attacked, but only because he wanted to see if the money that was meant for the Muslims was in that house. Does someone like Fatima, does someone like Ali, do they go against anything in Islam? We know that in their tradition, they have the narrations that say Fatima, if she is angered, Allah is angered. We have the other tradition where they accept that says, if Fatima is angered, the Prophet is saying, then I am angered, and if I am angered, then Allah is angered. Which means that Fatima, which means that Ali, which means that the Ahlul Bayt will not get angry at anything except that it's something that displeases Allah. And so some of their scholars went after, and they took, for example, that narration of the first caliph saying he regretted attacking the house of Fatima. Some said, instead of relaying the whole event, some said, the first caliph is saying, I wish I did not do such and such. Some, more than one actually, some even omitted the entire thing altogether. And so we can gather enough evidence from the Sunni tradition to show that there was definitely foul play involved when it came to the Ahlul Bayt. Like we said, threats of burning, attacking the house, people getting attacked. And so there is no doubt, there is no sliver of a doubt that what happened to Sayeda Fatimah, the oppression that happened to her, the oppression that happened to Imam Ali is a real thing. It is from the facts of history. And so when we look at the Shi'i tradition, we want to look and see what Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. What does our tradition tell us about what happened to Sayyidah Zahra? We have narrations that say that when she went to the door to try to tell people to not attack her house, because who would really from the Muslims dare to attack the most beloved human to the Prophet? If she were to stand and call them out, that is the big hujjah against them. And so ideally no one would dare to attack the house of Fatima. We see narrations in our traditions that say that she was struck on the face. We see narrations that say that she was kicked. We see narrations that say she was hit with the butt end of the sword. We see narrations that say that she was hit with a whip. We see narrations that say she was crushed behind the door and her rib was broken. Allahu Akbar. The daughter of the Prophet, the one of the Ahlul Bayt, the infallibles, was treated like this by those who claimed allegiance and support to the Prophet. And then we have in our traditions that is the reason why she died. A short time period after the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. What an absolute tragedy that they do they do something like this to the daughter of the Prophet. And so if anyone comes to you and tells you that the Sayyidah Fatima did not die oppressed, did not die attacked, that her house was not threatened, that person does not know what they're saying. And I implore you to read history, because history is clear, clearer than a clear sky on a clear day, that the Ahlul Bayt were oppressed and that Sayyidah Fatima died a martyr. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless the people attending this majlis and to bless this majlis and the people that set it up. May Allah have mercy on all your loved ones. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ensure that we are continuing to commemorate the tragedy of the Ma'soomeen, because this is religion. What we're doing tonight is part of the religion. We see in our traditions, the Imams, the Prophet, they enforce the fact that we commemorate the Ahlul Bayt in their sadness and in their happiness. And even if I come and I just listen to the tragedy or the martyrdom of any one of the infallibles, that is okay. It's not that I always have to be learning something. Just commemorating the martyrdom is enough. And so you have to ensure, every single person here, when there are events that are coming that are celebrating or mourning the cause of the Ahlul Bayt, you have to attend and you are doing a service to your religion. So I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that you are continually able to do so. And I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that you are continually able to learn about your religion and strive in serving your religion. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد.